Hello and welcome to Teenagers Untangled, the audio hug for parents going through the teenage years. I'm Rachel Richards, journalist, parenting coach, mother of 2 teenagers and 2 bonus daughters.
Hi, I'm Susie Asley, mindfulness coach, mindful therapist, musician and mother of 3 teenagers. 2 of them are twins.
Right, we've been contacted by a listener who has a really tricky situation. The father of her son is pretty much absent and an alcoholic, although I'm not sure whether he's in and out of this son's life. She wants to know how best to support him with his feelings. And I thought it would be nice, rather than only focus in on one specific scenario, we'll talk about this generally in terms of inconsistency of the other parent, perceived rejection, lack of a role model, and how it might affect them. So, and also alcoholism, which is a major issue, substance abuse of any type. And you've got some experience having a parent who's not living in the home.
Yes.
You know, that you can draw on. So.
Yeah, and massive, compassion for her. That must be really, really tough.
Really hard and very triggering for you when you're the parent who's there giving all the love. Let's start with a couple of reviews, but then I also want to, rather than nuggets, just come back to the subject of getting kids back into school, because one listener said they'd like to hear a little bit more on that.
Okay.
We could do an entire episode. We have already done an episode about absence from school. But it would be nice to just kind of go over it again briefly.
Yeah, it's been up in the news quite a lot, hasn't it?
Exactly. And we've had a very active Instagram account of people talking about the experiences they've had. Anyway, with the reviews, Susie, would you like to start with yours?
I would love to. It's a very nice review. Well, they always are. Hi, lovely ladies. Oh, hi. I really enjoyed the most recent episode. It was just like having a chat with a friend about what's been going on in life and discussing topical issues, things that we have experienced or think are important to share in parenting teens. I really appreciate and value your advice, help and support in my highs and lows as a mum of a tween. I'm looking forward to this year's episodes and how they enhance and help grow my parenting toolkit. Hugs, Ray. Oh, thank you so much, Ray.
Ray, thank you. And thank you for being one of the few people who've... Well, actually, no, we had quite a few people who fed back on that chatty episode. Almost all of it was positive. So... Not all of it, but some of, most people said, we'd like more of that. So we're not going to flood it with it, but every now and then we'll do it. We'll do a sort of mop up what's been going on and reflecting on our own parenting. This is from Veronique, actually, which came in from a WhatsApp message. And she said, you're providing super valuable content. I listened to one of your podcasts today. I so love your voice, literally beautiful voice, and figuratively from a content point of view. You're providing super valuable content without judgment, but the way you explain and talk together, the flow of the conversation helped me to see the pros and cons of parental decisions and positions and decide which could be mine.
Wow.
She's spot on though. That's the thing, because actually if you listen to people talking, you don't necessarily agree.
No. But
you can figure out, okay, actually, where do I sit with
where
that?
Where am I on it?
And that's the whole point. So well done, Veronique. Thank you for spotting what it is that we're trying to do. Because sometimes I think it's not clear, is it?
Yeah.
So let's just go back to this issue of getting our kids back into school, because I know that it can be really... they can be really anxious. And I know I've got a friend who's struggling with her daughter who is always crying the before she goes to school. She's really struggling with it. And
it's so upsetting, isn't it? As a parent, that must be so upsetting.
It's so upsetting. And they're both working parents. They have looked at other options, but there's nothing available at the moment. Yeah. And what I think they're doing so well is they're sitting her down and really going through with her what is going on. And I think that's the key. So when our kids are saying, I don't want to go back to school, you did a really great thing last week where you just said, so I just say, is there nothing good about school? Sort of giving them a sense that actually they do quite enjoy something.
There must be something, and can we build on that, even if it's, I like the break time snack.
Yes. And I think looking back to the anxiety podcast we did quite a long time ago, in that I included the iceberg, and actually it's quite useful sometimes to draw an iceberg and then just talk about, like, this is how you're feeling. So what's underneath that? What, and go through all the details of what's happening in school. What are the relationships like? Is it specific classes? Is it, so, because very often, even we adults find it hard to articulate what we're struggling with.
Yes.
And giving your child an opportunity to really unpick what's happening may give them more resources to deal with. And it could be an emotional objection, which is much harder to deal with, but it could be that there are things that you can speak to the school about that they could be doing much better.
Yeah, or that it's just one aspect of their day that has become massive in their head. And if they sit down and realise actually it's only that one thing, then it somehow feels a bit more manageable.
Yes.
And I think we talked about it in the anxiety episode, which was years ago. Feels
yes.
This idea that, you know, we want to stay in our comfort zones, and as parents it's really nice to keep our kids in their comfort zones because it feels nicer,
and we feel scared for them.
And sometimes we have to, you know, if we just as human beings stay in our comfort zones, we don't try anything new, and our zone gets smaller and smaller. So there is an element of nudging and going, right, come on, you know, I'm with you, you've got to step out a little bit. But the problem, I think, is if you've tried that and that didn't help, because that can be really helpful. Okay, I survived, I was fine. Actually, do you know what? I think I'm going to be okay. But if you've tried that and that hasn't helped, then more support or something else is needed.
Absolutely. And I know that there are a lot of parents who are very upset by the lack of support they're getting from some of their schools. I think some of the schools are struggling with not having enough teachers and not having enough support. So this is a really tricky situation. My heart goes out to anybody who's struggling with it. And
schools don't have the resources to have the teachers, you know, give them that extra care and attention that maybe they need in the morning to, you know, or whenever they're struggling. They just can't do it.
But I do think the communication with the school is absolutely critical, because the more detail you can give to them about what's actually happening, or it could be something that's completely separate from school but that's really affected them. If the school understands and knows this, they will probably give them a bit more leeway. So, for example, my bonus daughter, you know, when she found out her mother had cancer, she said it was amazing how well the school understood that and gave her a lot more opportunities to cope.
Yeah.
So, you know, and that's a very obvious one, but it might be something else.
Yeah.
So I think this communication is critical. And we as parents can we have the time at home to pin down the specific things that are happening. And one mother I spoke to said that her daughter was struggling with the break times when she had to go into this common room. And she said, we just made sure she had an activity instead. She joined activities that were happening during that time, so she didn't have to go in the common room.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, they solved it.
Yes.
It's not always that easy, but you know, these are some of the things you can do. If you want a full episode on this, we can do that. Just message us.
Yeah.
Okay. Back to this parenting issue with the father who's mostly absent, inconsistent, alcoholic. And so one of the first things I want to mention is a theory which is called the PART theory, or PART. And it's called the parental acceptance rejection theory. And I want to start with that because the whole point about it is that what's most important is how the child feels about the situation rather than necessarily what you independently observe.
Really important, because it's not always the same. We presume a lot, don't we? We have our adults.
It's natural. Yes.
Look on it and have our own issues with it, and it's maybe the child is experiencing it completely differently. That's really important.
You as a parent, because you're obviously divorced or separated from this person, are going to be seeing them through a lens of your own experience of them, but your child may not have the same feelings or opinions at all.
No.
And it's very hard not to kind of assume things.
Yeah, and have you tidied up in the breakdown of it? You know, there's a lot at play, isn't there?
Yes. And I want to mention this because one of our listeners said that they had an alcoholic father who took him on holiday when he was 14, just the two of them, proceeded to get drunk all the time. And I said, oh gosh, how did that feel? And he said, no, I loved it because I had access to alcohol. I wanted to be able to drink. And then at the end of the holiday, he got blind drunk. And the next morning they had to get up and leave. And the father went, actually, I really like it here. And I've met these gorgeous women. I think I'm just going to stay. You go home on your own. And this was a hungover, kind of vomiting, staggering 14-year-old.
Wow.
And I said, God, how did you feel? And he said, oh, I just thought it was a badge of honour that he thought I was old enough to get home by myself, even though some old ladies had to sort of escort him onto the coach because he was staggering.
Gosh, that's so interesting, isn't it? Whereas we would presume that he'd feel abandoned and angry and no, that's really important.
And his brother experienced that relationship very differently.
Yes.
So we have to be aware that these things are going to be different, right? So what to consider? So the one thing that I saw that I thought would be really useful is to have talking points ready. And what I mean by that is being able to say, let's say then they don't turn up, or they they don't come, they never call or anything. Being able to frame it in a way where the child doesn't believe it's their fault. That's the most important thing, because they can feel rejected.
Yeah.
And the way you stop that from happening is you over and over again reinforce that it's not them. And how you can do that is, for example, if you broke up with your partner because of, I don't know, you had differences about the way you wanted to live your life, or something that's not too detailed and toxic, you can say, oh, he's not coming, he's not part of our life because we don't agree with these things, or having some kind of script that explains it in a way that the teenager doesn't think it's their fault.
Yeah, because that's their natural go-to. It's really, really important that I think that you're right, because rejection is so painful for a child, however old, but it's when they're younger, and maybe even when they're teenagers, I would imagine it still is. It's a survival thing. It's like it's a gut survival thing. You need your parents, and you still do emotionally as a teenager. So when you're rejected, it's almost less painful to blame yourself than to think that actually they can't be bothered, or they don't want to, or they've rejected you, and if there's something wrong with you, then that's a reason. So that's, children often blame themselves because of that,
and maybe subconsciously not even knowing that they're doing it.
It's subconscious.
And I think also saying, so for example, with an alcoholic father, you can, rather than saying this is a bad person for being an alcoholic, they are struggling with a substance abuse, and so you say they have some really difficult things that they're struggling with, and they need their time to go and deal with this. It's not about you at all. It's about them and their problem.
No, because the kid will think that they're not good enough.
Yes. And maybe if I was better, they wouldn't be drinking.
Exactly.
Or something. Exactly. It's so important that we are not critical about the person. And I think it's incredibly hard to not be critical, that they are, we've talked about this before, they are 50% the DNA from that person, and they feel connected. And I think one of the things that I really resonated with me was this idea that you're at home looking after this child, putting your everything into them, whether it's financial, emotional, whatever you're doing, and then this person comes in and out of their life or isn't there and is gleefully off being drunk, and it's very hard to step back and say, like, why not keep thinking, why do they idolize this person when I'm the person doing everything?
And watching them potentially be really affected by it, and you get your kid to you mend them from the last time, help them, and that everything's balanced, and then it happens again. It's really challenging, and I think that's when the parent, who is the one who is doing the being at home with the kids and not going off drinking, is it's a huge challenge for them to really sit with all of it, so that they can be as calm and in control and clear as possible when things happen, because they will, and so that they're as least reactive as possible, because it's super triggering.
Yes, and we had an episode on how not to overreact, but I do also think in situations like this, if you can foster some kind of relationship with someone where you can say, can I call you and just vent?
Yes, exactly.
Do you mind, because I need someone else I can say this stuff to, that it isn't my child.
And also maybe an expectation, even like they in your own mind, you might really need that parent to come and take them away for the weekend, because you've got stuff to do.
I can imagine.
And the frustration when they don't show up again. Yes. In your own mind, have that expectation they're probably not going to come, and have a B plan in your head, so you don't, you don't fire off a whole load of, expletives when it's happening, or rage and all of that.
And I mean, stick to the facts. You don't need to give them huge... It's not your job to explain why the parent isn't there. It's not your job. It's their job to tell you. What you do is you say that the parent isn't there. I'm really sorry they haven't arrived this time. I'm sure they have their reasons. Yes. I think they're struggling with something.
Yes.
Okay, but it's not about you. It's definitely not. They are not rejecting you. It's about something that they're dealing with.
Yeah, I think that's really valid and really, really good way of doing it. I'm sure they have their reasons. It's not about you. Yeah.
Yes. And so validating their feelings is really, really important. And I think one of the thing I see over and over again is how important it is to keep reinforcing that it's not you. It's not you. And let your child know that you're there to listen. Validate their feelings. Allow your child to talk. So don't say, oh, don't cry. It's okay. If they want to cry, you just say, yeah, I can see it's really painful. If they don't want to talk, that's also okay, because I think a lot of boys, for example, and I know this sounds very gendered, but often they don't really want to talk about it.
No.
But one of our listeners said what they did was they actually did bring get a therapist involved. And if she saw that he was starting to struggle, but he wasn't talking, she'd say, well, shall I see if they have a gap, a space, so you can go and talk to them? And then, she'd get an appointment with a therapist and they'd talk.
Amazing.
Again, therapists aren't always available, but it can be someone else. So getting another role model involved, whether it's a grandparent or a friend or someone that they trust, and just being able to say, do you want to have a quick chat with them?
Yeah. And also maybe finding out if they're not a great chatter, maybe initially that, maybe they're angry. How can they manage that? Maybe they're not ready to talk, or maybe they don't know how to talk yet, and maybe there's something physical they could do, like run around or play football or do something that is allowing them to be with the discomfort of those feelings, but maybe without putting words to them initially.
I love that point. And as a mother of sons, you'll know that, one of the points that one of our listeners said was that she actively encouraged her son to get involved in any kind of sporting activity where he could vent his frustration and anger in a healthy way. And you can actively talk about that. You can say, I can imagine that you might be feeling this. They may say, no, I'm not. But if they are, say, yeah, I am. You say, okay, so you could go and punch something. You could go and, give them healthy things that they could use to vent.
Yeah, and then maybe they will talk afterwards, and maybe they won't, but they've got it out somehow.
Yes. And once again, that difficulty, where we talked about this in the self-harm episode, where one of the difficulties kids have is and adults very often, is how to, like, what am I feeling? Framing those feelings. So the more you can look at them and think, I think they might be feeling this. Now, you don't want to push your own opinions onto them, but you could say, some people in your situation might feel this. What do you think? And give them the words and say, this would be normal for some people. And so that they've got an idea that that's okay to feel that.
Yeah. I do also think that you have to get a balance on it, because I know all of us, if we don't want to talk about something, it can be really annoying for someone to go, oh, that must be really disappointing, or you must be, and sometimes it's really nice and relieving, and sometimes it's just like, no, I'm fine, go away.
No. And when
so picking up on that.
You're right. And when I was diagnosed with cancer, people, when they found out, mostly I didn't tell people. And when people found out, they were like, oh, are you okay? Do you want to talk?
Yeah.
And I think, no, I don't. I really don't want to talk about it. I'm good. I'm fine. No. I'm going to live. I'm going to be fine.
Yeah.
And I think, yes,
it can actually where they are within it, and maybe, dip in and out.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Interesting, when it comes to when it's erratic. So I think this son, his dad's not really around much, but when it can also be erratic, so they can suddenly reappear.
Yes.
And I read a really interesting thing that said erratic reinforcement sets kids up to become almost addicted to the unreliable parent. So they get a taste of being with or hearing from the person, and then they don't know when they're going to see them again. So it keeps them in a constant state of longing. And it reminded me of what I read about when I was looking at the way that psychologists have set up social media, so that when you put something on Instagram, you won't get the likes straight away. What will happen is they hold them back. So you keep checking, like, why is no one reacting? And then suddenly you get a dump and you go, oh, and what it does is it creates a sense of longing. It's the same thing.
Yeah, it's connected to attachment theory. It's attachment, how we are attached to our caregivers is really, really crucial. And if it's erratic, that's really confusing for the child. And then they long for it, and then it's gone, and then it's really destabilizing, or it can be really destabilizing.
Yes. And so it's the overreaction. We can't overreact. If the parent doesn't turn up when they said they were going to turn up, it's very, very hard. But like you said, try and think of, anticipate that might happen, and think of ways that you could deflect the situation, have other things ready.
It's a big ask for the other parent. It's a really big ask, and it's a big mountain to have to climb. And some days, like, you want them, you don't want your kid to be experiencing any of this. You didn't ask for this, and yet it's in your, it's dumped on you. So I think it's challenging. So hats off to people who are in that situation.
And it's just suddenly made me think, if you have anyone in your life who is in this situation, give them a cheer when they're just tough. Say, wow, you're amazing, because just to give them a bit of a boost, because it must be, when you sort of don't get any praise for anything, it's just hard work all the time.
And it can also be tough to be like, I think you mentioned it just before, the one who's at home doing it all, and then they sort of maybe have some sort of fantasy about the other parent and idolize them in a way, but that's due to the attachment, the erratic attachment, because we love our parents however rubbish they are. We need them, and that's all healthy and normal. But there's also this element of safety. So if you're the one who's at home doing everything, then you're giving unconditional love. The kids know that, they feel it, so they're free and safe to hate you sometimes.
Yes.
They don't really, but you know what I mean. Be angry and shove stuff onto you, but they're not safe. The erratic parent that's coming and going, that's not a safe space. They can't do that because they might not come back.
And that's
so key. So it can feel really offensive to be the one, but I'm doing everything, and you want to be with them more. That can feel like our own egos get hurt by that. It's totally normal, but it's really complex for the kid.
And one of our listeners who is a man whose ex-wife is an alcoholic, was saying that what he's had with his daughters is that as they grew, he gave them tools for having boundaries, to say, actually, I don't want to see you right now because I need to protect myself, or and it's really important to be able to tell them that it's okay to say when you want to see them, to set your own rules about what matters to you. And he said the problem was that when they were young, they could hate him when she didn't turn up. They found it, they could take it out on him. But as they got older, they started to realise that actually it was just between them and their mum, that she wasn't turning up, and that they felt more guilt for trying to put boundaries in place. But he said one of the great things he did was to explain to them that those boundaries are an act of self-love, that actually it's all about saying to yourself, I really deserve this.
Yes.
I'm a wonderful person. I'm a good person. And I need to have these controls over my life.
What a beautiful dad. That's
what an
really amazing
yes.
message to give, because it's really hard. And the child always wants to hope as well. There's a massive element of hope for us, isn't there? Like, we hope that, if only it'll be good this time, it'll work out this time. And it's dangerous to be angry with that partner, with that parent rather, because they might not come back.
Yes. And so staying on that, what you can say to your teenager is challenging negative beliefs. So trying to replace them with positive self-talk. So they may be feeling unlovable. First of all, talking about, so the older they get, the more they can understand what alcoholism actually is, and that it's an illness. And it's not that they're a bad person, it's that they're struggling with something that they've used to cure themselves of pain. And as this great philosopher, I was listening to one of his talks the other day, and he said, often it's not treating the problem that's hardest, it's treating the way that the patient tried to treat their problem. So alcoholism, drugs, whatever.
Yeah, then all numbing mechanisms, because we have some pain inside that we can't be with, so we try and get rid of it.
Yes. So you can actually try and set up a mantra. I am lovable because you are capable and deserving of love and respect. So using these phrases on a regular basis and giving them opportunities, maybe if they want to journal, on just a day-to-day basis. I know a teenager who uses journaling all the time.
Yeah, journaling can be great.
It can, or it may not work.
Yeah.
They can voice notes on their phones, anything to kind of get their thoughts out.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we underestimate the these kind of the idea of sowing a seed, because I imagine quite a lot of teenagers might go, oh, what a lame thing to do. I don't want to tell myself that. But you're sowing a seed that maybe they'll pick up and think about when they're in bed, or, you know, when you're not listening. Or,
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Like, you don't have to do it.
You don't, like, just because they're not sitting down doing the things you've suggested doesn't mean they haven't taken it in.
Yes. And tips for explaining. Now, alcoholism is a real problem.
Yeah.
And I've dealt with it because my father was an alcoholic, and there's a huge amount of shame.
Yes.
And you can say, don't feel shame. It's not your fault, but it's really hard not to feel the shame, because you feel connected to them and you feel like, what am I doing? You know, what is it about my family? And this is my DNA. And so therefore I'm not good. Yeah. And so trying to explain in more detail how alcoholism works can help.
Yes.
And there's a National Association for Children of Alcoholics suggests using this mantra to help your kids. I didn't cause it. I can't cure it. I can't control it. I can care for myself by communicating my feelings, making healthy choices, and by celebrating myself.
Wow.
And I will put that in the podcast notes, because I think that mantra is amazing.
It is amazing.
And very, very helpful. You could have it on the wall at home.
Yeah.
Just if they're struggling with some of this, so they can just look at it and go, okay, it's okay.
I think you're right about the shame aspect, because that's really toxic, isn't it? And it's shame thrives in secrecy, and there's so much secrecy involved with alcoholism by its very nature. Yes. And the more secrecy is, the more shame is felt, and shame dies when you speak about it in a safe space. Yes, it can't survive in that. But teenagers with alcoholic parents, that's probably not a very invitational space, is it?
No, and it's a very difficult one, because my father was living with us, not away from us. So actually, if he'd been living away from us, I could have distanced myself from it. But when they're living at home, you can't. I just couldn't have any friends. I couldn't invite people home, because you never knew what you were going to be dealing with, and it's a very difficult thing. So, you know, I know that we will have listeners who either lived with alcoholics or are living with alcoholics. It's a very, very difficult thing to have to live with.
Very unsafe space.
Yeah. One thing you can do is identify father or mother figures. And, you know, one of our listeners, this woman, said that she encouraged her son to take up rugby and cricket, and to find other dads who were around, who had a really healthy role model for them. Because what I think is amazing about the teenage years, it's the one time in your life when you have absolute insight into the way other people live. Think about that. So because I remember as a teenager going around to other people's houses, it's the only time when they don't clear up. You sit around the table with people who haven't sort of fashioned an elaborate meal because they've got guests, because basically you're kind of hanging out in their house and you go beneath the radar. So I think it can be, I learned so much from going to, I was shocked going to other people's houses. So like the first time an adult man ever asked me how my day was at another person's house. And I literally just scraped my knife across the plate. All the peas and everything went everywhere, because I was like, what? But it was great, because I thought, oh, that feels nice. I like that, right? And they can, so if you can introduce them to other environments where they can get this kind of male, you know, role model, or a female role model where you think, okay, that looks good.
Yes, and show them that there are other normals.
Yes, and they'll begin to crave their independence. They won't want mum hanging around all the time. Oh, my poor wounded bird. No. So yes, having other people where, you know, and this mother said, I'm not a psychotherapist, in the same way that I'm not a dentist. I can't fix his teeth. I can help him, but I can't. So she said, you know, if it was too difficult, then she would find someone who could help.
But we also shouldn't underestimate our own power as just in inverted commas, a parent.
Yes.
I mean, that can be the most healing space.
Absolutely.
You don't have to be a therapist to be good at that.
No, quite. And just knowing that there are people in the community that they can rely on. So identify those people who seem to always be there, and just say, by the way, remember that person's always here. Yeah. They're always here. Yeah. Like your granddad or your grandma or somebody, football coach, somebody, they're going to be there. They might give you a bit of tough love, but they care about you. They want you to succeed, and you need to succeed because you're worth it. Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe the idea of that being a consistent person is really, really important when the other person is erratic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The consistency.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's pretty much, is there anything else you want to add to this point?
No, just buckets of love to people who are in that, because that's tough. That is really tough. It's horrible seeing our kids in pain. And if you haven't caused it and can't do anything about it, and you probably got a whole load of triggering emotions all involved within it because of its nature, then that's a tough space. Yeah. So, yeah.
So and if you know anyone in your community who's in this position, go and give them a hug. Yeah. Give them, just something, take them out for a coffee or something, just so they have somebody, or just be a listening ear. Yeah. If they want to vent, just say, hey, you can always call me. And a friend of mine I met the other day, she said that, she needs to vent sometimes. I said, call me up. You can call me. Yeah. I'll listen.
Amazing. Yeah.
Because I'm not involved in the situation. So I can listen and go, yeah, I'll be that person. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
We can always do that. So I want to ask our listeners a quick favor. If you enjoyed this episode, think of one person who might be interested or might benefit. Text them now this episode or one of the episodes you liked and ask them to listen to it. That makes a massive difference to people being able to find us on these search engines.
Yeah, good idea.
Please. Yeah. You can leave a review if you're so minded on our podcast app or the website, which is www.teenagersuntangled.com. The Apple podcast player is the one that really commands whether people find us or not. But it's a nightmare to find ways to review on it. But even if you can just give it stars, lots of stars, that would help.
Yeah.
I pop up and down on social media all the time. I also send out a newsletter, so sign up for that on the website if you want. Susie has been doing more social media stuff.
I have.
She has, yes. And it's really interesting.
Oh, thank you very much.
So follow Susie on Instagram.
Yes, I'm
LinkedIn. Facebook, any of those places.
You can find all my links on my website. That's probably the easiest place.
Which is
www.amindfullife.co.uk. I've done a couple of videos, and the abuse I get from my teenagers is actually really funny.
That's painful.
Oh no, I think it's hilarious. They repost it on our family chat and then go, God, I hope none of my friends have seen this.
That's hilarious. The other day, one of her really close friends I follow, and I loved the pictures she'd posted. And I wrote something like fantastic pics, but I wrote PIX, and my daughter gave me such hell for it, And apparently the skull emoji is supposed to be, you killing me, and laughing to death about it. She was like, pics. Just don't try and be cool. Don't try and be cool. It just looks stupid.
I don't think I'd know how.
I clearly don't. I'm terrible at it. Anyway, also hit the follow button because then you won't miss an episode. That's it for now.
Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.